Hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Welcome to the show. There's a news flash. We got a great one for you. As always, some big news in terms of the U.S. commitment in Ukraine coming out today as Biden is set to send some of the most dangerous weapons of war that have been outlawed in most of our allied countries to Ukraine. They're cluster munitions, and they are known for being or using civilians as collateral damage when they are utilized. We'll take a look at the diplomatic process that led to that and what the future holds with all things Ukraine. Also, Elon Musk has gone socialist, ladies and gentlemen. We'll tell you why, and the reason may not be what you think. Also, we finally cover the riots in France just as they subside. We'll take a look at what it says about French society and what the future holds for one of the world's most volatile states. And finally, Kamala Harris has some things to say on the passage of time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here today. This is Newsflash. Really do appreciate it, as always. All right. With that being said, we have some, really pretty big news coming out of the Ukrainian war here today. So President Biden, he's approved the provision of U.S. cluster munitions for Ukraine with the drawdown of weapons from the Defense Department stocks due to be announced on Friday. So, yes, we're sending some of these cluster munitions over. These are, incredibly damaging and dangerous weapons that are known for, again, targeting civilians in the crossfire. The move is going to bypass U.S. law prohibiting the production, use, or transfer of cluster munitions with a failure rate of more than 1%. Comes amid concern about Kyiv's lagging counteroffensive against entrenched Russian troops and dwindling Western stocks of conventional artillery. So, yeah. Ukraine, we produce a lot of weapons, right? It's broadly understood. When they say the West, they really mean us. And when it comes to us, we produce a lot of weapons. But the thing is, with this Ukrainian counteroffensive that was just following up from the really tough, expensive, costly battle in both lives and ammunition for the city of Bakhmut, which Ukraine eventually lost, they are firing so much ammunition in this kind of trench warfare style and really not advancing very far that even our supply of weapons seems to be running out at this point, which is really remarkable because we make a lot of weapons. Our stocks are being severely depleted because we are essentially supplying one side almost entirely to fight this war. And they're currently in a counteroffensive. They're currently in a trench warfare style situation where Russians are very dug in. They need a lot of ammo. They're essentially wasting it a lot of the time. And we need to, A, supply them with more and more ammo at an increasingly rapid rate. And B, we need to give them something with a little bit more spice to it. And that spice could be civilian death, frankly. It's kind of a rough way to put it, but it is the reality. So that is a big point, not obviously to cause civilian death, but to, shake things up, because essentially what the cluster munitions is they're a bomb that you essentially drop or a shell that you fire that when it explodes, little bits and bobs essentially fly everywhere, and that's how obviously the civilians get killed, the bystanders get killed. They're essentially bombs that pack a little bit of extra punch. It really is a very rough situation here. It follows months of internal administration debate over whether to supply the controversial munitions, which are banned by most countries in the world. This is, again, another example, I think, of the United States, who has done for a very long time. It was one of their best specialties have been setting rules for the rest of the world that you're bad if you're not the U.S., that you don't follow, but if you're the U.S., you don't have to follow them. It's up to you. It's, depending on the conditions, you can make them, you can, get all the credit for making them. You could be the savior of democracy or, the biggest supporter of law and order, whatever. The quote unquote policeman of the world, and that can all come without you really even having to follow any of these laws. It really is quite incredible how little of this stuff really gets any kind of respect, any kind of attention, any kind of processing by any stretch of the imagination. So cluster weapons explode in the air over a target, releasing dozens to hundreds of smaller submunitions across a wide area. In the air over a target, and then just scatter a bunch of just little smaller munitions that just pop, 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 and then that can really kill. So more than 100. And so again, the United States would like to claim, we are the world's policeman, we're the source of all good in diplomacy. More than 120 countries have joined a convention banning their use as inhumane and indiscriminate, in large part because of the high failure rates that litter the landscape with unexploded submunitions that endanger both friendly troops and civilians, often for decades after the end of a conflict. The U.S., Ukraine, and Russia, which is alleged to have used them extensively in Ukraine, are not parties to this convention. 8 of NATO's 31 members, including the United States, have not ratified the convention. So again, another example of, we see the United States, China is stepping in, they're making more and more peace deals. So just recently, just the other week, with Saudi Arabia and Yemen. And there's been a lot of consternation, even on the right. Why is China stepping into this role? This is why. Is because we are constantly showing that we are willing to break the own norms that we push on other people and set just for our own personal interests here. It is really, really could not be clearer when it comes to that. So the primary weapon under consideration is going to be the M864 artillery shell, first produced in 1987, firing from 105 millimeter howitzers or 155 millimeter howitzers in the United States and other Western countries that they had provided Ukraine. In its last publicly available estimate more than 20 years ago, the Pentagon assessed that the artillery shell to have a dud rate of 6%, meaning that at least 4 out of each of the 72 submunitions each shell carries would remain unexploded across an area of approximately 22,500 square meters, roughly the size of 4.5 football fields. So say you drop them over a town square, for example, or you drop them over a center of a city. This could scatter things all over. It can land on someone's house. It could, I'm sure you can imagine the horrific list of problematic scenarios that can go along with that. So the defense officials said details over the new assessments were not releasable, including how, when, and where the tests were done, and whether they included actual firing exercises or virtual simulations. Military manuals say these weapons cannot be fired in training because they are part of war reserve stockpiles. There is no waiver provision of 1% limit Congress has placed on cluster munition dud rates written into the Defense Department appropriations for the last 7 years. Biden would bypass it in Congress, according to the White House official, drawing down munitions from existing defense stocks under a rarely used provision of the Foreign Assistance Act, which allows the president to provide aid regardless of appropriations or arm export restrictions, as long as he determines that it is in the vital U.S. security interest, which is really interesting. It was bypassing in Congress that they found for the various Pentagon accounting tricks. It really has not been. A lot of people worried about, here comes this Ukraine aid, it's going to be really under threat. No, at least for the entire Biden first term, they found very easy ways, in definitely the first 2 years of a Kevin McCarthy-led House. They found very, very easy ways to bypass Congress. They found very, very easy ways to continue to send, whether it's this accounting trick that allows them to send billions more to Ukraine, this new Foreign Assistance Act thing that they're drawing out, which, if the president really, really wants to do it, he can just say, screw it. Is there anything the president can't just do? Jesus Christ. It is quite remarkable here to see that they're, again, continuing to do it unceasingly here. So the final U.S. decision to provide them to Ukraine was first reported Thursday by the Associated Press. Although the United States had used cluster munitions in every major war since Korea, no new ones are believed to have been produced for years. But as many 4.7 million cluster shells, rockets, missiles, and bombs containing more than 500 million submunitions or bomblets remain in military inventories, according to estimates by the Human Rights Watch, drawn from Defense Department reports. A 2022 Congressional Research Service report to lawmakers noted that significant discrepancies among failure rate estimates of cluster weapons in the U.S. arsenal. with some manufacturers claiming 2 to 5%, while clearance specialists have reported rates of 10 to 30%. So it's a pretty big deal. It's a pretty big effect, and this is a remarkable step up, and that's a continuing indication by Biden, as we said on the last show, that he has no plan to kind of stop any of this, to wind any of this stuff down, because it is something that it's an outlet that needs to be created for our war-based defense economy, and we're getting to the point now where things are going to be so bad, the counteroffensive here is going to be so ineffective, and the weapons that they have already been given are going to be so effective that they are essentially just trying to say, you know what, we're going to go with cluster munitions, which are, shall we say, legally and ethically dubious. With that being said, we are talking about Elon Musk going socialist next. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening and supporting Newsflash. We now have a brand new way for you to be heard if you want, whether a text message or a audio message. Please, no video messages. I really just do not think that's necessary. We have a new feedback box open for you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is officially open. SWRN702@gmail.com. Send a text message, send a voice message of no more than 30 seconds via the voice memos function. Either of those two options, and we will 100%, not going to find this guarantee anywhere else. We're going to play it on the show, listen to what you have to say, and it literally could be about anything. Well, if it's inappropriate, we won't play it, but it could be about anything. Thank you so much. This is my thank you to all the listeners who have stuck out with us and want to have their own voice in the show. SWRN702@gmail.com is the address. We want to hear your feedback, so with that being said, let's move to our next story. This is a pretty big one. Elon Musk has professed to follow socialist values. The only people that can make someone like Elon Musk do that is a little group of people called China, the Chinese government. And Elon Musk and Tesla have joined Chinese automakers in pledging to embrace core socialist values and compete fairly in the country's car market after Beijing directed the industry to rein in a months-long price war. This is one of the reasons why, the middle class has been so successful in China and been able to really just thrive. You can really take a look at some of their, obviously they're not perfect, to say the least, when it comes to human rights, the forcive, re-education being the kindest word of it, about the Uyghurs. But when it comes to Chinese economy, and it comes to the general direction of travel with their country, it's clear that it's going up as we are going down, and it's getting more functional as we are getting less functional. This is a country that, their wheels of government, their wheels of power, it's definitely a lot of competition, a lot of, internal battling. But there's one thing that is very, very clear, and that is they are running their company for their interests, which also, happen to align with the interests of the middle class of the economy, and not the rich. Some say, I think it's a fair claim to make, the poor, especially the rural poor, have been left out for a good chunk of China's, economic miracle that they've had. But, it just so happens that, obviously China and their government are running things in their interests. They're running it to maintain power. But part of the contract that they have had is with the people is that they need to guarantee a strong, growing, and thriving middle class, and they have used whatever means necessary to do it. So they have really resisted buying off of government, the corruption of government in any way, from the rich and from outside businessmen, multiple times. I'm sure you can think of examples. Jack Ma, for example, have had to really, and Elon Musk is another example, he's doing it right now, have had to kowtow in a pretty big way to Chinese business interests, to Chinese governmental interests. And, again, I'm not trying to say, China, Xi Jinping really cares about the middle class, is just doing this for all, ideological reasons. No, he's doing it because he knows he needs to do it in order to stay in power and to continue the stability of his government. So China and its Tesla and their biggest Chinese rival, BYD, were among the 16 manufacturers to make the commitment in a letter signed at a motor industry conference in Shanghai on Thursday. follows a battle among lawmakers of electric vehicles after Tesla slashed the prices on its Model 3 and Y cars last October in the face of rising domestic competition. Tesla and Buffett-backed BYD have been the chief beneficiaries, boosting sales at the expense of a clutch of smaller rivals and some foreign brands, as both companies reported record sales in the second quarter. The joint letter, which came at the behest of the Ministry of Industry and the Information Technology, appeared to signal a truce among top EV makers in the world's biggest car market. Miao Zhenqing, a senior inspector at the ministry, said China's car industry needed to avoid reckless price cutting. The letter, which uses language popular with Chinese President Xi Jinping and the ruling Communist Party, also highlights how Tesla is navigating an increasingly fraught U.S.-China business landscape, which is definitely becoming increasingly fraught. And Elon Musk, given that he is just this one simple guy, and you can see how he is reacting to these things very publicly rather than through carefully managed statements, PR, lawyers. There's no one face of any other corporation, but there are many other corporations that have severe business interests in China. So Musk has become one of the world's richest people by growing businesses in the West and riding the boom in Tesla's stock market in the final years of the U.S. bull market, landscape. And he has done this while, again, working quite closely with the Chinese government. So this letter uses language popular with the Chinese President Xi Jinping, also, again, highlighting how this works. Tesla was, again, the only foreign car maker to sign. Despite this, he previously posted on Twitter that he's a socialist, writing in 2018. Well, everyone thought they were socialists in 2018. By the way, I am actually a socialist, just not the kind that shifts resources from the most productive to the least productive, pretending to do good while actually causing harm. True socialism seeks greatest good for all. Tesla declined to comment immediately on the pledge. The Chinese market is immensely valuable to the company, accounting for just under 1/3 of annual sales. He obviously also owns Twitter and SpaceX, Musk, and he traveled to China last month and met the foreign commerce and industry ministers, as well as Robin Zhang, founder and chair of CATL, the world's biggest maker of EV batteries. His trip returned the spotlight to restrictions on free speech that have intensified under Xi. Twitter is banned in China and must refrain from using the platform during his visit, drawing criticism from human rights groups over allegations of compliance to Chinese censorship, which, again, we know with Elon Musk, he supports, just like everyone, by the way, he supports free speech as long as it is perfectly beneficial for him. So China's commitment to core socialist values and Musk's absence from Twitter while in China appear to clash, at least in spirit, with Musk's 2022 description of himself as a free speech absolutist. Bottom line on this, I think it's a very, very interesting dynamic that is continuing to grow and develop here, because we have China on one hand, which is, compared to the U.S., which is a government, the U.S. is, obviously, that has really no control over a lot of what happens in his country. It is being controlled by, people in boardrooms and really responsive to the forces of the market. And its policy and policy options are dictated by the limits of the market. There's certain things they can't do if a certain coalition of business say, we can't do this. And a lot of the people in place know that without even having to be, pressured in one way by business interests, because business interests, A, don't have to tell them, or B, have already a strong enough relationship with them that it's really not that hard. But with China, they're able to use these levers to control the economy, to stop things that they know are bad before they get out of hand. And that, in and of itself, is a very, very powerful thing that could lead to really some of their long-term success here. So it's going to be interesting to see how they continue to deal with it. Especially interesting to see how Musk, who wants to play both sides against the middle, handles the next 5 or so years. But it's definitely a story we'll talk about before too much longer. For now, though, let's move on. My name is Spencer Walsh. This is the Spencer Walsh Radio Network, and if you're listening to one of our podcasts, whether it's Newsflash, Hidden History, The Spencer Walsh Show, or something else, ladies and gentlemen, we have one simple request of you. Please be sure to rate us, subscribe to us if you like us, and leave us a comment, because just like all of you, sometimes we need that feedback in our lives, good or bad. We want to hear what you have to say. So please do those steps. Make SWR and content better. And thank you so much for listening. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are moving on to a very big story coming out of France, and a story that we have tried to talk about a little bit last week. Had too much chaos to really process it. But yeah, the French riots have been going on in a pretty big way as of late. There are stories of riots from France being broadcast across the world, with talks of businesses being looted, and everything from town halls to libraries going up in smokes at the hands of the rioters. These riots are popular revolts against police brutality, against the feeling of being treated as if they're second-rate citizens, against the cost of living in France. They began on June 27th with 17-year-old Nahel M. was executed by a police officer while attempting to escape a roadside police check in one of Nanterre's working-class neighborhoods. So it's a pretty important thing here is to understand that it's kind of flipped the dynamics between city and suburb, where in France, the much poorer people live in the suburbs, whereas in America, it's the wealthier people live in the suburbs. This murder was not an isolated one. Police killings have been soaring since former President François Hollande passed a 2017 bill allowing police to use firearms in case of civilian noncompliance. Since then, number of victims of police brutality has grown year after year. But if anger was sparked by this particular killing, it has been fueled by years of police abuse. A 2017 study in France showed that if you're perceived as an Arab or black male, you're 20 times more likely to be subject to a police check than the rest of the population. And by the way, who does that sound a little bit like? Write us here back home. And then, again, the thing with France is it is literally illegal to talk about race or racialize someone in a public setting because, it promotes this kind of ideology of colorblindness. Got to do the best to see people, by nothing. The race has to be left out of your perception of them. But the reality is that just doesn't work because you can't really take racism out of people's brains just by passing a law. People are going to still, even if it's not technically allowed for them to, write maybe the race down on the traffic stop or whatever. So that's why they have to do kind of studies on this. This is not kind of independent. This is independent studies, not really done by the government like we'd see in America, because race is such a big part of our politics. They have really made an effort to bring race out of their politics. But the fact is, people still have these biases, people still have these perceptions, and it plays out in a really big way the moment you're trying to stop and search someone, or trying to account for how hard it is to be stopped and searched as a person of color, or how much more likely you are to be stopped and searched as a person of color. Working class neighborhoods where the police revolts are taking place, the general revolts are taking place, are severely under-resourced in terms of public services, with unemployment rates at 16 to 20% against a national 7 to 8% average. As of today, 2,300 arrests have been made, and their profiles show some similarities. Many of them are teenagers. Very few of them have criminal records, and they tend to be between the ages of 14 and 18. On certain evenings, the average age of arrested rioters is just 17. This is really a youth revolt here. But so far, political leaders from across the spectrum have refused to grasp the weight of the problem, resorting to false accusations. Portions of the government and right-wing party, the Les Républicains, for instance, accused the left-wing La France Insoumise of sowing chaos in the country for seeking political solutions to the riots and refusing to join the same blanket condemnations. The Jean-Luc Mélenchon party was the biggest member of the NUPES group, the left-wing group there in France in the parliament. So every time social conflict intensifies, the same charge against the left is directed from the right wing and the Macronites. At the highest level, Emmanuel Macron's response has been unsurprisingly, authoritarian and brutal. More than 45,000 police have been mobilized throughout the country to deal with the revolts. In a speech with the Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin, and Prime Minister Elizabeth Borne, Macron pledged that these revolts would be swiftly dealt with, and insisted that it was social media and video games that were partially to blame for the conduct of rioting teenagers. Macron also called for parents to take responsibility and look after their children in the evenings. Justice Minister Eric Dupond-Moretti said parents should hold their kids and threaten them with prosecution, if they did not. Last Friday, the UN called for France to seriously tackle the profound problems of racism among law enforcement. France answered that any accusation of racism or discrimination by law enforcement in France was totally unfounded, and no political announcement or political solution to end these revolts have been proposed by the government. And I think, again, the tough thing here with France is that it is, again, what it considers itself a race-blind society, and even though it isn't, the fact that it considers itself that is still a very big deal, because you have to get to a certain point. If we're going here from denial to anger to, I think we're in the anger stage now, but I don't know if we're able to get to the acceptance stage without a lot more pushing and a lot more effort. And that, that pushing, it may come from some, LFI, like political solution or something like that. But, it really is going to be, if you look especially at, French history and everything like that, it really is very likely to be from some sort of popular effort, some sort of popular outrage as well. So that's a really big deal, and something that a lot of people need to kind of look at more seriously. The far right has called for a state of emergency to be declared, with far right politicians labeling the movement as civilizational war, arguing the revolts were led by descendants of immigrants. They call for people for the government to let people put order back in the streets if the government would not. While Macron attacks the radical left, fascist militias armed with baseball bats have been spotted in the cities of Angers and Lorient. Well, they've been helping police make arrests. And in Lyon, where 50 fascists marched through the streets chanting, "This is our country," the police and fascists have been singing from similar hymn sheet in recent days. 2 police unions have issued statements explaining police forces were at war with pests and savages. Ooh, that is certainly one way of putting it. Well, I think the solution here is pretty obvious. If you look at what France is, they're coming from the point of we are proud. Again, this comes back to the same psychological thing of the stages of grief, grieving over the fact that really coming to the realization that we're not a perfect post-racial, race-blind society here, and we have a lot of work to do to create a culture where this stuff is seen as far more not okay, not acceptable, and just better. These incidents have to be really, punished severely, called out in the media, called out in culture before I think anything, get the political solution gets more and more possible. Because people are just at the point where, we wouldn't need to do anything. It's just fine. It's just, one isolated incident. People really overreacted. The rioting was a big problem here, not the shooting of the kid in the first place that caused the rioting. So we're not really going to do anything. Well, if people really stand up and, have to push and drag and squirm to get that culture to the place where it is in the U.S., where you have, because 10, 15 years ago in the U.S., it would have been the same reaction. But, post George Floyd, post 2020, this stuff is tolerated, I think, way, way less. So it's definitely still tolerated, but, less, and the culture of outrage is definitely there in a way that it wasn't. So that is definitely something that needs to happen in France. All right, let's go to our last story. A great Kamala Harris Fest. So Kamala Harris at the Essence Fest, and she decided to drop a little take on time itself. Let's take a listen.
Well, I think culture is a reflection of our moment and our time, right? And present culture is the way we express how we're feeling about the moment. And we should always find times to express how we feel about the moment that is a reflection of joy. I think culture is a reflection of our moment and our time, right? And present culture is the way we express how we're feeling about the moment. And we should always find times to express how we feel about the moment that is a reflection of joy, because it comes in the morning. We have to find ways to also express the way we feel about the moment in terms of just having language and a connection to how people are experiencing life. And I think about it in that way too. Well, I think culture.
Anyway, yeah. If you listen to that and we're like, what? It seems like based on the video the moderator's face is at the Essence Fest in, I believe, Louisiana, New Orleans. People are just as confused, but it really is remarkable that and she's done this before, like the passage of time in our culture. It's like, I tried to follow that. I honestly can't even, I should rewind it. I can't even understand what she's really saying there. It is just something that does not make very much sense to me. And it really is remarkable that like this person, and I'm sure she's a perfectly nice, lovely person in private. Like, this woman is in a position to potentially lead the future of the Democratic Party. Not to say that it is crazy that, or it isn't crazy, that Joe Biden, as an 80-plus-year-old man, is currently, so senile and sleepy Joe and all that, and is in position to lead the Democratic Party. I think that is just as insane. But in any way that this should be, her or Joe Biden should be at the top of this ticket, is a deep, deep indictment in terms of the just quality of politicians on the Democratic side, and also really the Republican side, to be fair. But I may be kind of crazy on this. Certainly you guys can correct me, email me if I'm wrong at swrn702@gmail.com. But I really do think that the great speakers of the world in the past, the politicians, the people who were able to just come off like normal human beings, those people are few and far between in today's day and age. It's either the basic politician speak, or it's something like this, or it's just people who just have no idea to communicate in a way that makes sense, just makes sense at a basic level to the average human being. And with that being said, I hope I've done a pretty good job communicating to you today, because that's all the time we have. We'll be back on Monday.